Today is August 10th, 2016. Kay Wagner is talking with Dr. Jack Lockhart, a retired Gunderson internal medicine physician with a subspecialty in rheumatology. Dr. Lockhart began practice with Gunderson in 1977 and retired in 2010, totaling 33 years of practice. Welcome, Dr. Lockhart. It's nice to have you here. Do you have any corrections or additions to the introduction?
Nope, that's pretty accurate.
You grew up in Indiana, correct?
Both my wife and I are from the same town. We went to kindergarten together and in southern Indiana, a little town called Connorsville, which is very close to Cincinnati, about 50 miles away. It's over on the Ohio border. And so we've known each other virtually all our lives. I moved to Connorsville when I was 3 years old and stayed there till I graduated and went to college. And after that, I just haven't been back much.
What did your folks do?
My father was a family doctor back then, called a GP. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure how he picked Connorsville. I'm sure that there was some kind of a process where they said, "Where's there a need?" He'd been in the Army during World War II. He'd gotten back. I was born while he was overseas. And I think Mom just said, "Hey, we got to get going here. We got a kid to raise." And so we moved to Connorsville, and it turned out to be good because, like I said, I met my wife in kindergarten then.
And do you have siblings?
I have one sibling now, but we had three. There was me, I'm the oldest, and there was my brother, who is about 18 months younger than I. He died about 5 years ago of a variety of problems related to our family's heart issues. I had a sister who was 14 when she died. She was hit by a car at the Indiana State Fair when she was crossing the street with my brother. I was a senior in high school that year. And then there was a tag-along brother that is my remaining sibling, and he lives in Chicago. And I see him periodically. He's coming up in a couple of weeks to play some golf with me.
Anything else about your family history or childhood that you'd like to share growing up?
No, I guess my father was a physician, and he was a family doc, solo practice. He was gone most of the time, and so mother did the raising, and he would come and go all hours of the day, and that's how I became interested in medicine. It also was part of the reason I thought about, well, I'm going to see if there's some other type of medicine to get into other than family practice, because I would say he was gone 90% of the time and all hours of the day. My brother and I'd be watching TV, some late show about 1 in the morning back then, and the phone had rang, and then he'd come out a few minutes later and he'd say to us, "Are you guys still up? Go to bed." And we'd sit there and watch the end of the movie, and it'd be about 2:30. He'd come back and we'd still be there, and then he'd go, "Get to bed." So I decided I'd find a type of practice that wasn't 24 hours a day, and I also, that was part of the background on why I was looking for a practice with what I would now call backup, where something like this, where you can go away for a few days and not worry about your patients or the place burning down without you being there.
Well, and those were the days of the house calls too.
We used to go on house call. My dad, that would be about the only time we did get to spend some time with my dad. My mom, he'd get called on a Sunday or a Saturday when we were home from school or whatever, and to go out to some, and he'd go, okay, and he'd be going out to some farmer's house or wherever to make the house call. And Mother would say, you're going to take the kids with you. So we'd all get in the car and we'd ride along with him. And when we'd get there, he'd go in the house with his bag, and we'd stay outside, and we'd eventually get out of the car and look in the barnyard and just look around. And eventually he'd come back out, and usually with a bag of beans or some corn or something, because a lot of those back then, pre-Medicare, people paid in whatever way they could, sometimes with produce and whatever.
Was it hard on the family to lose your sister at such a young age?
I think it was on my parents. And as I have children of my own now, I understand how that can be devastating. But it was the only sister, and it affected my brother, who's the one that's deceased, because he was the one that was with her, and he always blamed himself somehow, although from what I understand, she just stepped off the curb without looking. Yes, it was. And I still think of her from day to day and time to time. I have a portrait of her that was drawn when my grandparents took my brother and sister and me to a trip out east. We went to the New Jersey boardwalk, and they had those sidewalk artists, and they painted a picture of each of us, and it was in my mom's house, and when she passed away, I brought it home. I still have it. And so I see her every day when I do my exercise.
You're a Dartmouth undergrad and received your MD from Harvard Medical School. What drove your choice to pick those wonderful schools?
Well, being from Indiana, basketball's the main. Basketball is everything in Indiana, and it's what the same thing that the Packers are to Wisconsin. When I was in the 6th grade, our high school team was actually a pretty good team that year. It was a team that beat Oscar Robertson's team from Indianapolis. That was the only loss Robertson had in the 2 years he played high school basketball in Indiana. And the captain of that team, by the name of Dave Gordon, was kind of my idol because we loved basketball and went to all the games. And so I heard, he was a senior that year, and I was in about the 5th grade, I guess, that he was going to go to Dartmouth College, and then he was going to go to medical school and then transfer to Harvard and go to Harvard. And I said, I was about the 5th or 6th grade, I said, well, that's what I'm going to do. And that's kind of what I had in my mind. I guess I'm lucky that he didn't say he was going to get a job digging ditches at the, at the local pipe laying company. At any rate, I kind of set my sights on that, and it worked out. At my junior year, I applied for early admission. By then, I was pretty good at basketball, so they were probably said, well, here's a guy that could play basketball for us, and his grades are reasonable. And so then I got there. After getting there, I was plodding along when I developed a form of arthritis that we would now call, in today's lingo, B27 positive spondyloarthropathy. Back then they just called it juvenile arthritis. I was bedridden, and that's how I got interested in rheumatology. The rheumatologist at Dartmouth that took care of me was a wonderful doctor. They'd said I'd never walk again, I wouldn't play basketball, blah, blah, blah. So I finally got where I went back to school. I missed a whole semester, and actually I was slowly getting better and started playing basketball again. But between then and getting to play basketball, they have a program at Dartmouth where you can go to the Dartmouth Medical School after 3 years and spend a year at the medical school, and then they'll give you your undergraduate degree. And I went ahead and applied, got accepted after my junior year. Told my dad, hey, I'm saving you a lot of money here. It's one less year of college tuition. About then I got well enough that I could start playing basketball again, but I'd already committed to the medical school, and I'm glad I did, because I did get accepted at Harvard and transferred there and finished my medical education there. And worked out just like I'd planned it in the 5th grade.
And you were married by this time as well?
We got married. Actually, I was never married while I was at Dartmouth, but at the end of my 2 years at Dartmouth, we got engaged, I think, with I still had 1 year left at Dartmouth Medical School when we got engaged. My wife's a teacher. She was working first in Cincinnati, and then a town close to my hometown in Indiana. And I would see her from time to time, but we got married in that summer between Dartmouth and Harvard, and she got a job in Brookline, Massachusetts, one of the suburbs of Boston, and as a teacher, grade school teacher, and things worked out all right there too, because my dad was going, well, how are you going to pay for this? You're here in medical school. And I said, well, she'll get a job. It's not that easy. It turns out it worked out okay, and so she was with me basically from starting at Harvard on 1968. We'll be coming up on our 50th anniversary here in, I guess, 2 years, year and a half. Actually, our 48th of this, what is today, the 10th, a week from today. So 49th will be next year, yep. 50th the following year, if we make it.
In your residency and fellowship?
I was looking for an internal medicine residency because that was a prerequisite to getting in a rheumatology fellowship, and besides, I liked internal medicine. I'm sort of a problem-solving type of mentality, more than, partly I'm left-handed, so maybe that's part of the reason I'm more interested in thinking than actually physically doing things, because I've figured surgeons probably all had to be right-handed, because I'm guessing everything's set up for right-handed. At any rate, I went to, I got an internal medicine internship in Cleveland at the University Hospitals, Western Reserve. Was there a year. It was during the Vietnam War. And they were drafting everybody, and of course the physicians had their own separate draft. Tried to get deferred. If you get deferred, you can take specialty training, but then you have to pay them back as a specialist. It didn't get picked. It was just a lottery type thing. And so I was drafted in the medical corps after my internship. And I always like to say, got stationed in a war zone. I was in Chicago, and then got transferred to another war zone in Detroit, and served 2 years as a medical officer. And I think I didn't go to Vietnam because my brother, who's deceased, was in Vietnam at that time. So I think they had that rule about no two brothers could be there simultaneously, or two siblings. And it was while I was there in the Army that I was in the Army, that the wheels got started, it landed me here. Because while I was in the Army, one of the guys I worked with, got drafted like me, had gone to the University of Minnesota Medical School and had done his first year of, the same thing I had done after graduation in Minneapolis at the university program there. And he was telling me it's a great place and this, that, and the other. And I'd loved Dartmouth's outdoor, northern kind of atmosphere and the skiing and just the outdoors part. So I told my wife, this program sounds good. Why don't we consider going there? And if you don't like living that far north, after a couple of years, I'll be done with the program. We can go wherever you want. Well, reluctantly, she said, okay. So I applied there and got accepted and went there. And it was while I was, and got accepted and went there, and ultimately one of the, she loved this part of the country but didn't like big cities, and we had, through my head of my program in rheumatology, had said, you ought to look at the Gunderson Clinic. And it's a much smaller city, but it's kind of like a big university type of an outfit. So we came down and looked at that, and she loved the city, and I loved the situation, and so here I am, thanks to the Army.
Was there a particular mentor or role model that inspired you?
Well, my dad probably more than anybody else, as you may have gathered, but there were a couple. My high school basketball coach was very instrumental in kind of giving me confidence. I was always kind of geeky and gawky, and he instilled a lot of confidence in me, and I appreciate that tremendously. Also, our high school math teacher, Ed Huber, was math was probably my best subject, and he just made it even more interesting, so I appreciated him. And then the mentor, that the head of our rheumatology program in Minneapolis when I was there, Erskine Caperton, he's still practicing. In fact, I talked to him on the phone a couple of weeks ago, and I said, aren't you retired yet? And he goes, no, he's got to be close to 80, because I'm getting I'm in my 70s, and he said, no, I'm still, he goes, I'm only working 5 days a week now. I thought, only 5 days a week. He made that sound like he kind of cut back. But that was kind of the way he instilled things in me. Find a solution to everything. Don't turn over every stone you have to turn over. And that's the approach I took when I came here. When we get consults, they'd always consult us when they needed something really, a lot of digging involved, and stick with it.
Well, next question was, how did you hear about lacrosse or Gunderson?
Well, that's a separate story,
okay,
because I'd already heard about it before he suggested it. In fact, when he suggested it, I said, oh yeah, I know where that is. Back to when I was in the Army, during the summer, those of us, we were stationed in Chicago at Fort Sheridan, which is not there anymore. They closed it. And as part of its responsibility was to provide healthcare support for, back then, Camp McCoy, not Fort McCoy, in the summer. And we would take turns going up for 2 weeks. And we only, the guards people coming for their training brought their own healthcare providers with them. Our job was to take care of the people who were there permanently to run the fort itself. So there was a small dispensary. And the very first day I was there, and a very, very, very competent nurse that ran this dispensary. And you quickly learned that, you know, defer everything to her and she'll tell you what to do. Well, the first day I was there, I was into my desk. She goes, "We have a patient and he has an eye injury." And I said, "Okay." I'm not the best in eyes, but I went into the seam, and he was from the machine shop. And when I went in, he had a bolt sticking out of his eye with vitreous dripping out on his face. And I'm thinking, oh God. And I said to her, "What do you think we should do?" She goes, "I'd recommend we send him to the Gunderson Clinic." And I said, "Where's that?" "Well, it's in La Crosse. It's about 15 miles from here." I said, "Okay, how do we get him there?" "Oh, we'll fly him in a helicopter." And I said, "Well, that sounds like a good idea. Let's do that." That's how I first heard of the Gunderson Clinic, until some years later when Erskine said, "You ought to go down and look at the Gunderson Clinic."
How did the patient do?
I think he did okay, and it was probably, trying to think who might have been here then, because maybe Carl or one of the older ophthalmologists when I got here.
Carl Schmidt?
Yeah, yes. You know, that was probably about 5 or 6 years before I came here, so he was probably already here. I don't know. You know, I asked the next day, but I never saw him again.
How many clinicians were here when you joined the clinic?
I was number 104. That was my number. I'm guessing, therefore, right around. There were about 4, 5 or 6, 7 of us that started the same day I did, and so whether they had lower numbers than me or higher numbers than me, I'm not sure. But
Everybody seems to remember their number, though.
yeah, well, that was important back then, because you used it for maybe billing or something.
I think
forget.
so. Mm-hmm. Was it ever challenging to be a non-Gunderson?
No. I guess I never really thought in terms of Gundersons versus non-Gundersons. So I never, it just never, it may be for some, I guess, but it was never for me. I'm in a small subspecialty too. There's, of course, we all did internal medicine when I first came, and then whatever our specialty was, we did that as well. It was kind of 50-50, or if you didn't just do rheumatology, you did
Emergency
whatever.
room.
Yeah, we did whatever. So, but there weren't. George Liang was here when I came, and he left about 2 hours after I got here. So it seemed. So I was by myself for the first 5 or 6 years, and so I didn't have, I mean, it wasn't a question of competing with anybody. It was trying to get help, actually.
When did they add another rheumatologist?
We've had a kind of a checkered history with that. It was probably, I was here 6 years without one, so it must have been about 6 years. I don't think it was that long before we started looking. But it took a while to find one. Trying to think what his name was. Bruce Wallen. And his wife, he was from West Virginia, and his wife was from West Virginia, and she just never wanted to leave West Virginia, so he lasted about 2 years. then started looking again. By then they were quicker to look, and it didn't take as long. That's when Gary Bryant joined us, and we made a very good team for several of years when we added Peter Valen, then Dr. Peter Valen, and Dr. Danning, who's still here. And then we needed more help. We got Guy Fiocco, and his wife came along and worked in internal medicine. And then I was starting to think about retiring, and almost simultaneously on the same day, all three of them said they were leaving, and it was one of those things where it wasn't some organized thing. It was independently, they were all thinking of leaving for various reasons. I think Brian had become burnt out running the healthcare plan, and Valen wanted to get in a more academic setting. He went to Vanderbilt or somewhere. And Fiocco had come from Texas initially, and the only reason he moved here, it turns out, was the school system in Texas wasn't to his liking. And they were very smart kids. Actually, his daughter went to Dartmouth, another Dartmouth connection. But once they were done with high school here, he goes, we're done with the cold, we're going back to Texas. So he left and went back to Texas. But they just happened to be, the three of them made the announcement almost simultaneously. So I stayed a few more years just because I knew Dr. Danning was going to need some help there, and the patients too. And that was then Dr. White was, who's still here, we hired him. And then right after I left, I think they've hired a couple of other people who have come and gone too, but I think they're still looking, so. Yeah. Rheumatology is a hard specialty to find people for because not a lot of people go into it.
How so?
It's to be honest, a lot of things are driven by remuneration nowadays in healthcare, and it's mostly a cognitive field, and so it's always been. It's got its advantages, though, particularly for people who want to have a family life. It's not as likely to have nighttime issues and lots of people in the hospital, etc. Emergencies, but it's and there aren't a lot of programs that train them, and when they do train them, they only usually train one or two fellows. So Mayo's got a good training program, and so we, in the university in Madison and Milwaukee. Milwaukee, actually, I think Dr. Valen trained in Milwaukee.
Is the patient population generally older?
No, it's a kind of a misconception. Yes and no. I mean, arthritis, rheumatology is a kind of an autoimmune oriented field. Yes, we all get arthritis as we get older, and it's a degenerative process that we certainly help take care of. But the things that got me interested in it were these strange diseases like lupus and psoriatic arthritis and the B27 spondyloarthropathies that I mentioned that I have, and vasculitis, and it's just a plethora of strange diseases that cause them. And that's why I like internal medicine. In rheumatology, practically every organ system can get involved in some of these diseases. So you have to be kind of a juggler and be able to handle a bunch of possibilities.
What have been some of the advances in the field that you've seen?
Well, the biggest advance is in the treatment of rheumatoid arthritis, which I didn't mention there in that list of diseases, and some of the similar types of arthritis, inflammatory arthritis. They have developed therapies now that alter the immune system that's out of whack in a lot of these disorders, suppress the part that's out of whack. And in the old days, with our residents, we would have them come see patients with us in the clinic, and you could show them have them examine the patient and see what was happening from the arthritis, because they had significant issues with their joints. But nowadays, thanks to these drugs, it's hard to find patients with deformities anymore unless they're really older and just had their problems prior to the advent of these drugs, because they work, and while they don't cure the disease, they have almost eliminated a lot of the crippling that now they have their own set of problems, but all treatments do. But so I would say that's been the most amazing development. It was in probably the last 10 years of my practice that came along. Earlier, the first part of my practice was well, they'd already had them for a while, but total joint replacements, which also just revolutionized the ability for our patients to be functional and happy.
An integral part of the Gunderson mission is research, and you were actively engaged in arthritis-related trials. Tell us about that and the value of research.
Well, research is very important. I was sort of a peripheral part of that. Dr. Fiocco and Dr. Valen were the two that were most interested in that. And I think Dr. Bryant was at one point too, before he became is tied up to the health plan, that his time was less fluid. But and then Dr. Danning too. So they were the ones that would go out and find these trials to participate in. I was never a huge interest in research. I liked the problem and the patients, but we all helped run the trial, so I was kind of there to help them make sure everything got done. And it was usually if one of them were out of town, or they had to go on outreach or whatever that day and needed, the guy was coming for interfacing with the trials and seeing how things were going, I'd gladly help out. And I think it's a very, very important part of what the clinic does in a bigger sense, because it gives patients an opportunity to get therapy ahead of when it might be otherwise available. And it helps, I think, the practitioners with moving their practices forward. I was never, I think you would, and maybe that's why Valen went to Vanderbilt, to get into primary research. I know Dr. White is who's here now, has been more active in kind of the primary kind of research that is going on in rheumatology nationwide.
Well, in 1988, the Midwest Cooperative Rheumatic Disease Study Group was formed with 5 Midwestern states that studied oral gold and anti-malarial drugs for rheumatoid arthritis. Is that still active?
I don't think so, but I think, and that may have been Bryant and me that did that. That was well, that was a long time ago. Yeah, I was involved in that. But I don't recall what what came of it. I do remember that oral gold turned out to be kind of a bust. We were hoping gold was a form of therapy that was not really gold. It was a salt of gold, and it was the primary treatment for rheumatoid arthritis when I first started here. And the problem is it had to be given by shot, and it was there were a few other things, and so they were looking for a way to administer it orally. And we used it for a few years. Boy, I'd forgotten that there was an oral form of it. It probably, I bet you can't even find it anymore because of the advent of these drugs we were just talking about.
Well, and it was
now whether that bigger group is still active, I can't answer that.
there was looking back at some of the documents that we have on file, there was a publication called MedWatch. This would have been 2002 to 2008. A patient was mentioned from Toma who suffered from rheumatoid arthritis, and you were one of the 4 rheumatologists actively engaged in these arthritis-related trials at Gunderson. I didn't put her name down, but apparently whatever was being used to treat her worked out well.
Worked out well.
Mm-hmm.
Well, in oral gold, as I said, was something we did use for a while. It seems to me that diarrhea was one of the bigger side effects. I'd forgotten all about oral gold. It's been, I'm wondering if it's even, I guess I'd have to go in and look in the thing to see if it's even available anymore. Because there's a lot of meds that I used early on in my career that you can't find anymore, for either because something better has come along and there's no demand for it, or the risk, given the fact that there's other things available, outweigh it. So
I think that the drug that was used on the patient that I just mentioned was, now if I pronounce it correctly, Kineret?
Kineret, yes,
Mm-hmm.
it's another one of the immune modulators, and it's still available, I'm pretty sure. I don't remember using a lot of it near the end of my career. It was one of the early immune modulators that we talked about that before some of the ones that we use more frequently now. And some, it turns out, work better against rheumatoid arthritis and those kind of problems, and others it seemed like they would be kind of similar, and why that is, you'd have to get Dr. White or somebody to explain, because he's the immune expert.
Medical education is also an integral part of Gunderson's mission. Describe the value of education to your clinical practice.
Oh, well, that's one of the reasons I came here. What I was looking for was a place that was sort of had a university type of quality medicine and teaching without, the problem with a university is you have to do research or you're out. And I was looking for a place where you could be more flexible on that, and if somebody wanted to. Because I think education, my wife's a teacher, and I always enjoyed, I did teaching at the university in Minneapolis before I came here in my last year. I was a teaching fellow as well as a teaching assistant as well as a fellow, and I just like kind of working with them, and so I can't think of a better way to keep physicians on their toes and make sure they're staying abreast of what's going on than teaching, because students will force you to, they'll say, well, but I read or I did this, and secondly, you got to keep up on what's changing, or they'll quickly point you out as a fraud. So I think teaching's a critical part of being a good institution. And when you're off by yourself, you know, there's a tendency just to start doing things the way you've done them, and then a cocoon forms around you. So, and all I have to do is look at the staff here to see how much teaching has been important to us, because some of the most, well, a good part of the staff came through the program, and a good part of the leadership came through the program.
Were you familiar with Dr. Overholt before you came here?
The Ed Overholt,
Ed.
the senior
Yeah.
Ed Overholt. Before I came here, no. I met him when I interviewed first, and then I quickly became friends with him because, well, I was in the Army, and that helped, I guess. But I just liked his approach. It's kind of like I was saying with Dr. Caperton. You got to get to the bottom of the problem, but he also wanted to get to the bottom of the problem without wasting a lot of money or time. And so he made you think and look at the picture, not just let's start digging a ditch, but to sift through it and figure out what was going on. He was fabulous. In fact, as an aside, I play golf with Dr. Wild, who's retired, once a week, and Dr. Witt, and many a time while we're playing, we're talking about something, and we'll go, yeah, if the colonel were still here, he'd be rolling over in his grave about whatever it is we're talking about. So, you know, we still think about him all the time and go back to what his approach would be in this situation.
Besides your clinical practice, you served as secretary of the Lutheran medical staff in 1981 and had several other leadership positions. Talk about those and how they contributed to your overall experience.
Until you brought it up when we arranged this, I'd forgotten I'd done that job. When I first came, I guess another person that I should say really influenced me tremendously is Dr. Newcomer, Kermit Newcomer. His office was right across from mine when I first came, and he kind of did the rheumatology until I got here, because Liang was already leaving, and he'd done some kind of, he hadn't had any official training in it, but he kind of assumed it. So, plus he lived close to us, and he was always very nice to me, but he got me interested. He said, you're going to go to the medical society meetings. I said, oh, okay. And my dad always went to the medical society meetings, so I just assumed that was something you did. And as a result of that, I started getting involved in bigger picture. Back then, with 104 people, you know, we had the meetings once a month on one floor of the clinic where we'd have some hors d'oeuvres and drinks and talk about things, and you got to know everybody. So over time, I got to know a few people that were involved in the medical society that ended up getting me kind of involved in other things. I ended up being the secretary. I don't know if that must have been an elected job. It was probably something that the loser gets. I don't know, but I'd forgotten I'd done that. But it eventually led to me being the chairman of the Department of Medicine, and also I was become more and more involved with the medical society. I was elected to the board of the state medical society, and then ultimately I was the president of the state medical society for in 1999, I think it was, so just before the millennium. And as a result of all that, I got to know a lot of politicians and people that how to run things and how to get things done that could affect the clinic. That's how I met Congressman Kind. At the time, he was not the congressman, and I was just getting started this, but he's become a very close friend as a result of that. And I, as a result of all that, I also got appointed to the what was once called the Tobacco Control Board. When the tobacco companies settled and gave us $6 billion or whatever it was, Governor Thompson appointed me at the Medical Society's recommendation to the board, that board, and I served on that for a couple of years. And then subsequent to that, Governor Doyle appointed me to the Medical Examining Board. And I always thought it was, both a Republican and a Democratic governor appointed me to state kind of things, because I was sort of, I was just interested in getting things done. I wasn't interested in getting a certain person elected or not. Internally here, as a result of getting involved with all these politicians, I consider it somewhat accidentally, they started the External Affairs Committee. I don't know what it's called anymore, but it was a group of people that met to kind of keep track of how the external environment was going to ruin our lives here. And Dr. Newcomer was chair initially, and then when he retired, I became chair of that. I was also on the Compliance Committee, largely because of what I just said, and in fact, a lot of it has to do with government regulations. And so I did a lot of sort of politics and for the clinic, and helped get things done at the Medical Examining Board, move applications along, etc. And it was worthwhile. And I'm kind of sad to see how politics is run now. Everybody just, pointing fingers at the other guy. And back then, people tried to actually work together, I think, even if they had different ideas. Not sure I'd do it now if I was starting over.
Given the environment. What recognition or awards have meant a lot to you?
Well, I don't know. I've gotten a lot of them. I got a very nice when I was done as chairman of the Department of Medicine. The department gave me a nice plaque with I was an Indiana University fan and Bobby Knight fan from being in Indiana, and it was a plaque with a piece of the floor from Assembly Hall. And when I retired, I got a picture of the clinic before they built all this stuff now, from my friends out at Onalaska. And I forgot, so the last 10 years I was out at Onalaska because we were mostly an outpatient and they needed the space here. So, but out there, and they'd all signed it. I still got it hanging in my living room. Everybody that I had associated with out there and signed it. And then being president of the State Medical Society, I would say, and I was given their Director's Award. They give to one person each year that's done something. I think it was the year I was worked a lot with the Tobacco Control Board. So I kept busy besides the practice and a variety of committees. I was on the personnel committee back when there was such a thing for a while. I remember that too. Used to meet down here somewhere.
Doctor's lounge, probably.
Doctor's round, yes, exactly right.
I don't know what that is now, but
It's not for the doctors, and it ain't a lounge. That's probably two things we can count on.
you and your wife Joyce have been generous supporters to the foundation and are members of the Legacy Society. What motivates your continued foundation support?
Well, I've already said one of the main reasons I came here was education, and for the education program, and it's been an exemplary example of that, and I figure I owe them something. They were. All I have to do is look, and as you may or may not know, seemed like 2 hours. It was actually 5 months or 6 months after I retired, I had a heart attack. And if it hadn't been for my wife, we wouldn't be having this conversation today. She finally forced me to go to the hospital, and it turned out to be just in time. At any rate, when you've utilized the system here, you realize how important the education is. We're doing a very good job because, as I said earlier, a lot of the people we have around here are our own product.
Thinking back to your tenure at Gunderson, what would your colleagues say that you're known for?
Yeah, I remember thinking about that question. I guess I couldn't think of a definite thing, but I would say stick-to-itness. I was, as I've implied earlier, the training I got was such from both the Colonel, Overholt, and Caperton, was such that keep digging till you get the answer. Don't just go, I don't know. And so we got called a lot when they were having trouble figuring out what it was, and we would keep after it, and while others would disappear, we'd say, come to our clinic and we'll follow you along till we figure it out. I think they just could count on my being there and not abandoning ship most of the time anyway.
What would you like to be known for? The same thing?
Yeah, that we didn't cut corners, and that we when people ask me what would you tell young physicians, or the medical society, I still contribute to their foundation too, and they have a white coat campaign for the medical students at the 2 medical colleges here in Wisconsin. I give them some money each year to buy them their white coats, and we're supposed to write a little thing to go with the coats for them to read. And I always say the same thing, and I think it's becoming more and more important to remember to keep the patient first and number one, because there's just too many competing things nowadays that are pushing the patient to the side, and so keep the patient number one in your mind, and you'll do just fine as a physician. That, and know your limitations. I always got upset with physicians who made up their mind on something they really didn't know that much about, and getting them to relent would be a challenge. So never be afraid to know your limitations and ask for help. Another part of being in a big place like this is it's easier to ask for help than when you're out in the middle of nowhere by yourself.
If you could change one thing in your years of practice at Gunderson, what would that be?
I can't think of anything, to be honest. I mean, I was always pretty happy here. We ran things the way I think healthcare needs to be run, and I guess nothing that I had control over. I guess if I had to change anything, it would be to get these outside influences on medicine. But the money comes from somewhere, and it's usually it's not from the patients anymore. So that it's being more and more driven by other influences.
Do you have a favorite story about Gunderson? Patient who changed you? Best day, worst day?
I always like to tell the story about the first day Dr. Bryant came. As I said, he was about my third or second partner. And we had a vacation plan, my wife and I. And that was back when we started the rotations on the first of the month. And so it was the end of probably July or sometime, and I was going to be leaving August 1st, and he was supposed to be here whatever time, and then a couple of days before, and I was going to get him oriented, and Jack Udell was my resident that month, which made me feel good because he'd been here a while, and I knew he could steer him around the place, get him from place to place, and over to the ward. We still had patients back then, and something happened that got him delayed, and he wasn't going to get here. And it came time for me to leave, and I just called him and said, I gotta go. Our resident's Jack Udell. He'll meet you at the door, and he'll take you around, show you where to go, who to see, what to sign. Everything worked out fine. Gary was a fabulous physician, and Udell held up his end of the job. But I know you couldn't do that at a big university.
You're volunteering at St. Clair?
Yep, I do that nowadays. I work at St. Clair. Obamacare has shrunk the amount of work we have to do, which I guess is good. As I still go out to rheumatology rounds. They have rounds once a week to discuss tough cases, something I started years ago based on what we used to do with Dr. Caperton, and I always found that useful to have everybody kind of know what's going on in case somebody called about them. It wouldn't be a strange case to them, and B, to get more thoughts into to the case. So I still go out there from time to time and participate. Now I forget what the question was.
Oh, well, it's more about retirement and...
Oh, yes. So I go out there once a month, and as I told them, actually about once a month, I told them recently, I said, well, there's good news and there's bad news. The good news is that Obamacare is working, and we're not seeing nearly as many patients as we once did. The bad news is now they all qualify to come back and see you, so you guys are going to have to get back to work again. So they've been busier, although how well it's actually working out, you'd have to ask them. But we still, they just cut the back. We used to work once a week at St. Clair. Now we work about every other week, and that still keeps us busy. Dr. Norenberg's been over there, Dr. Wenga, Dr. Garrity. I think Dr. Reinertsen's there. So yeah, we have a good Gunderson contingent that helps there.
And you have 3 children.
3 children, 2 in Portland, Oregon, and 1 in Chicago. One of them went to Portland, Oregon, the other one out to visit her, and liked it so much he ended up just staying. Portland, Oregon's almost like a suburb of La Crosse or Wisconsin now, because it seems like everybody in Wisconsin moves to Portland, Oregon.
It's a great city. And then you have grandchildren?
4. 3 girls from the son that lives in Chicago, and 3 girls from the son, and then 1 boy from our daughter in Portland, Oregon.
And what do your children do? What occupationally?
My daughter's the oldest, and she's a social worker for a large healthcare system in Portland. She deals mostly with the elderly, so I'm always threatening my wife, you better be careful or your daughter's going to have you committed. My son in Portland, he's the youngest, is a high school science teacher, mostly biology. And his wife works for, and my wife's, my daughter's husband is a teacher also. My son's wife works for the Portland Trailblazers and in the ticket office, so he gets to go to almost every Portland Trailblazer game. And then my son in Chicago's, his wife's a teacher, so there's a lot of teaching in the family. And I probably might have become a teacher if I hadn't become a doctor. It was kind of fun being both, because I really do like teaching. But my son, it's hard to explain his job, but he works with a guy that basically supervises the renovation or building of very, 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 very high-end homes for your very, 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 very rich people. You know, we need imported Italian marble from wherever, and we need a landscaper that can put in 5,000 trees and those kind of things. So he flies around the country to where they're building their houses, and but he's also lives in Chicago, which has its ups and downs.
What was his background? What his degree?
His degree is in some kind of building. I don't keep track of that exactly. He worked for a contractor here in town for some years before he moved to Chicago, where he worked for my brother, one that's still living, who was building condos at the time. He's out of that business now. And he became kind of his go-to guy for dealing with the actual people doing the nailing and hammering. And then when my brother got out of that, he somehow found this guy was looking for somebody to help him, and he had the necessary kind of background from what I just told you, and that was about 15 years ago. And he's always showing us pictures of some of the places that they're working on, you know, in Florida and Maine and wherever, Baja, and Chicago, a lot directly in Chicago.
And what else do you do? You and your wife do for retirement fund?
We go to Key West, Florida, for 2 months in the winter every year so far. And we rent a house, and we've met friends down there. We've got friends down there now. We've been going to Key West for years. I went to a meeting years and years ago for CME and down there, and liked it so much we started going back every year to the meeting. And then we started stretching out the time, and then near the end we stayed a whole month, and then now we stay for 2 months. We go, I work at St. Clair. I also volunteer at the Salvation Army once a week. I work in their food pantry and at the front desk, just answering the phone and what have you. And I play a lot of golf with Dr. Wild, Dr. Witt, and a couple of other people, and Dr. Devine recently, some. I have well, the grandkids they take up a lot of your time when they're around. Particularly those 3 girls, they're like herding cats. Just, and then we, what else do we do? Well, we still have our gourmet group that meets not as often as we used to, and now we go to restaurants more than do the cooking. It was made up of a bunch of kind of people that came around the same time: Brubaker, me, Lockharts, Lathrops, Devines, Conleys, Motters, Witts. Seems like there's one other, Erdmans, and there's an 8th one, Eggers. So we still do that periodically, and one of my goals was to learn to cook. I always loved food and good foods, and so I took some cooking classes and still experimenting with that. And then a large part of my time, including today, is still I'm pretty religious about my cardiac rehab since a heart attack, and I've got a pacemaker and a defibrillator and some valves in, and so I like to tell people it seems like I spend more time here now that I've retired than when I was working.
You come here for the exercise?
I went through their program here. I do it at home just because it takes time to go back and forth, and I've got all the equipment in the basement, and it's quiet and it's cool down there, and I can cut about a half hour off the whole thing by doing it at home. And I'm pretty religious about it. We have a dog that we love, and I take her to the dog park almost every day, or to the dog beach, and let her play. And I raise orchids. I have a greenhouse, and I raise orchids. There's a couple other people around here that.
Schauberger.
Yep, and ophthalmologist at Onalaska, if he's still there. I guess I don't see him, so I don't know if he's still there. I'm blocking on his name. So yeah, there's plenty to keep you busy, and as we helped with some of the retirement seminars they have for the people getting ready to retire. As I've told them, you still have to do the same things that you had to do when you were working. You still got to pay the bills and get your hair cut and get the car serviced, and so being retired doesn't mean you can just. It's not like these people my son's building the houses for, where somebody's doing everything for them, and they're just sitting around doing this. You still have to go through your thing. Is you slow down as you get older, so it seems like it's taking longer to get everything done, and I'm still not working at the clinic. So, but I'm tired every night. I sleep well. It's been good so far. And one of the reasons I retired when I did was I knew our family history about the heart attack, that it could be at any day, and turns out it was only 6 months away. But I decided my dad was working when he died, and he died of a sudden heart attack. So strong family history, and I think you got to factor all those things in. Plus, I always say I didn't want to be like Brett Favre and just stay a little too long. You want to get out while you're still doing things right, not when you're starting to make mistakes.
True enough. Anything else that you'd like to share?
No, I just asked about why I support the foundation. Yeah, I really think this was a great place to work, and it provides great health care, and I hope they can continue to do so. And that's one of the reasons I support the foundation, is that I like to think that they'll work to see that that's the case. Time will tell.
Well, I thank you for coming in today